All right, well, thank you. Appreciate this opportunity. We just wanted to make sure with the recent court filing that we're able to answer folks' questions. This is a new phase that we're entering into, and want to be able to tell folks what's happened in the past, what actions have been done to protect human health and the environment, and then what to expect coming up. We are in the midst here of a court filing, and so that has more details. We've been able to share more than we have previously because the enforcement action has now moved forward on this, and I want to be able to share this information. The spot that we're at right now is we have taken steps to ensure human health and the environment are protected. We are providing safe drinking water to the residents of the apartments, the service station, and the nearby residents, including a wider swath of sampling for drinking water to make sure that others are not currently impacted. Our next steps are to move forward with an investigation to understand the full scope of the contamination under the ground. There's still uncertainty there, and there poses risk to the public, and that's why we want to be on top of it and make sure that we understand what's occurring underground and then creating a long-term solution to move forward on this.
Can you say more about what this investigation will entail? What are some of the next steps?
Sure. So right now we've installed a number of additional wells around the first service station so that we're able to tell what's happening under the ground. We want to make sure we understand where the full plume is. We have an idea of, at the service station itself, where the removal of contaminated soil and petroleum products was done, but we know that it's reaching further than that. So understand the true scope of it, where it's potentially impacting, to be able to set up a plan to be able to have long-term solutions.
And what about drinking water? Like, we know that's been affected for some nearby residents, but is that still something that you're watching for or looking for? Or would you remain concerned about that?
Good questions. So because we still don't know the full extent of the contamination, we still want to make sure that we are taking actions to make sure folks are protected. So for instance, we have drinking water filtration systems on the apartment, service station owner, and one home that's impacted, and we have a schedule of regularly sampling other homes to make sure that nothing changes. While they're currently, the water is not contaminated and it's safe to drink, we want to make sure nothing changes, and if it does, we'll be there right away to take action, provide safe drinking water to those residents.
So right now there are no warnings in place are you encouraging residents of Elgin to stay away from groundwater for now, from tap water? Are you encouraging them to drink bottled water? And if so, what point does it need to get to in order for you guys to issue that order?
Sure, great question. So right now the city's drinking water is safe for the general population. Where there's impacts is around the service station and those that are serviced by a water main that has petroleum products seeping into it. We sampled homes around that area, and those, for instance, the apartment building, the service station, and one residence, they did have levels over the health-based values set by Department of Health. We put them on a filtration system so their water is being treated and is safe to drink. We are sampling other homes around the area. If they were to exceed the health-based values set by the Department of Health, we would provide bottled water to them and put together a long-term solution. Now, this is where some phases this summer we'll be moving to toward also, is we need to fix that underlying water main. That is right now the source of how the contamination is impacting the city's drinking water localized to the area around the service station. So we're going to put together a plan on how to replace that so that the filtration systems are no longer needed in these individuals' homes or the apartment buildings, and that we make sure that there isn't any other potential impacts to folks.
So reading the complaint, one thing that struck me is that it took residents actually smelling gas when they turned on their faucets months after this happened for it to be identified. Do you have any sense of maybe how, I guess, what's a better way to phrase that? At that point, is it like almost too late? Have they been drinking water that has gas in it? And like, what might some of the health risks be associated with that?
So the first detection was soil vapors and smells coming from the sanitary sewer. And that's where we had the first action and started looking into where the potential impacts. I think this really goes to why prevention is so important and why we took this court action, is because we have systems on underground storage tanks like the service station that are supposed to detect whether or not something is leaking. That system was being ignored and overridden, which caused this problem. That's the early detection system, and it didn't work because of the actions of the service station, which is why we're going to court on that issue. That's the early detection system. That's so important. The next is, as you mentioned, is folks noticing things in in the stormwater sewer and the like, and then our investigation to go in and take actions to do it.
Right, but I guess my question is like, wasn't until October of 2022 that people noticed that they were smelling gas when they turned their faucets on. At that point, can they assume that they've been drinking water with gas in it?
It depends. We may never know, unfortunately. We wish we could know how long it had been there. The important part is as soon as that action was found, whether someone, in that case, smelled petroleum products, the state and Department of Health work to provide safe water, and we start sampling. As soon as we have any exceedances, we provide bottled water as soon as possible.
Can you describe what may, I suppose it's hard to know exactly, but what may happen to mitigate the actual cleanup of the rest of the plume? Like, is there going to be dirt removal or?
There could be many things. It's going to depend on how the investigation goes, which we should have the results in early summer here. Some things that have happened in other places, we may have wells that continue to pump and try to extract any of the petroleum that's still underground. Petroleum tends to float on top of water, so we call it free product, and we try to remove that through extraction wells. We could remove additional soil in places. Those are some of the examples to remove the contamination to not create issues other places. In addition, we're going to take steps, for instance, with the water main, to make sure that we're able to replace that so that if there is contamination there, that it can't impact the water any longer. Unfortunately, and this is why prevention is so important, is when we have groundwater impacts, in many cases, we're not able to remove all the contamination. We try to remove as much as possible, make sure the environment and human health is protected, and are able to clean up as much as possible.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding that. It's not clear yet whether you will be able to remove the remaining 5,000-ish gallons that's still there, right?
Our investigation is going to be able to
Okay.
tell us that where the scope and magnitude is, and then we'll do our best. But in many cases, when there is a leak, we're not able to remove all the contamination. Our goal really is to make sure that we create a stable situation, remove as much as possible, and make sure it's not impacting human health and the environment. So making sure folks have safe drinking water. There is a vapor intrusion. Making sure those pathways are removed and people are protected.
So if, you mentioned that there are safety systems in place at every gas station to prevent exactly this from happening. And the complaint suggests that those safety systems were ignored repeatedly over the course of 41 days. What would have happened if they had not been ignored? Can you give me a sense of, would the gas station have had to shut down entirely? Couldn't sell anything? Like, what would that have looked like?
How that should happen is they'll say that the leak detection test didn't pass. You can call a contractor in, as the state learned of the soil vapor issues and from the sanitary sewer. We called in a contractor. They started checking the system, started replacing pieces to be able to make sure that the line is protected, and then determine if bigger repairs are needed. That's what should have happened. What instead happened is the owner kept pushing the button to say reset, to the point where it broke the system and it stayed open, and they couldn't detect the leak, and it just allowed the system to keep running, which made the leak worse. Which is why it's because of those egregious actions, the state is taking the court action.
Do you think the owner was aware of his actions? Because you said that he kept hitting the restart button, and do you think he was aware of the fact that by doing that it was going to disrupt the system and cause petroleum to leak into the groundwater?
The system is set for when you get the warning is to take the next steps and check it out. They knew they didn't do that. Beyond that, you'd have to talk to the owner on what their thought process at that point, but was what required of them and what the system is telling them to do, they did not do. They did the opposite.
Do your streams around here flow into the Zumbro, the Whitewater River, and or the Mississippi?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know the exact locations where they all end up, but we can get you that information.
But water did make it to one waterway.
There's a
or
creek
gas.
right out here, it's mostly a dry creek, which then flows into the Whitewater. So that is where, in the court filing, we talk about there being a trout stream impacted, it's Whitewater River.
So why don't obviously community members knew this was happening at the time, but why are we only hearing about this, a year out, more than that?
It's unfortunate though, in the cases of compliance enforcement case, which is what the court action is. We have to collect all the information, and that's all private until we're able to move forward with a court action or a resolution of it. Now, what the community heard, and as soon as we started having any concerns about public health and the environment, is we started talking to the community, individual residents, the apartment building owner, the homeowners next door, to be able to sample to provide them safe drinking water. So that's the first important part of the communication. What you're seeing now is kind of a later phase, and that's rectifying the issue that caused this. The non-compliance, the egregious actions of not taking seriously the violation or the warning signals that the station owner was giving.
What's the likelihood, because I know we mentioned that creek that flows into the whitewater, what's the likelihood that there could be even trace amounts of petroleum in that water that's now flowing into a bigger body of water, a tributary?
That's what the investigation is looking to do. We've been sampling groundwater, soil, and other things to get a better understanding of what the scope is and what is the impacts now. The good news is the leak stopped. We've got a large amount of product of petroleum that removed during the cleanup and the soil there. We just need to see what is all out there more. So good issue, leak stopped, be able to do some cleanup. We want to make sure we complete the job and do it right.
And there have been no fish kills, right? As far as you know.
Correct. No fish kills.
Can you step over by him so we can pick up on audio with that microphone? Just kind of lean up right on that table there. There we go, like a doctor. Okay, good. Got anything from MPCA?
Well, we actually covered last week. There was a historic look back on a groundwater event that happened in Spring Valley, which is one of the neighboring
At the Ironwood landfill.
communities here. There were toxic fluids that leaked into the groundwater from that landfill. I just wanted to ask, is there a precedence for this in this region? And, when has this happened? And if so, in what other communities, and how has it been tackled there?
The specific actions here where the service station owner saw the warnings, hit the reset button over and over, and had the system then fail is pretty unique. It was egregious. So there really is not a comparison there. Unfortunately, though, there are leaks with other types of service stations, and they're smaller, and we're able to catch them quicker, or the historical ones that we're finding later when they're replacing tanks. But this is a unique situation.
Well, if you say it's egregious and what the owner did, why would he have kept doing it? Is my question.
That would be a question for the owner.
I will say about southeastern Minnesota is a karst region. And so whether it is fertilizer in a field, a leak of fuel from a gas station, runoff from a landfill or any other industry, this region is susceptible to contamination because of the porous nature of the karst region, and that is why the agency looks seriously upon this part of the state about what can we do to prevent any sort of contamination.
Karst compared to what is it like up on the Iron Range or in the Brainerd area? What is that, a different type of bedrock?
It's a very solid, being that this is limestone and very porous. It's like a sponge. So you put something on the soil and it runs straight through, and then it's locked into the groundwater. So that's why when the agency announces fish kills, those fish kills are predominantly in southeastern Minnesota because of the karst region.
What's your guys' job in analyzing this and doing what you got to do? How do you describe what you guys do in a situation like this?
So that's where our staff works on our petroleum remediation staff. We have inspectors to inspect service stations, making sure they're keeping up with their records, making sure they're keeping up with their tests, the tanks are functioning. That's the prevention. We never want a leak to occur. We also have staff, though, that if there is a leak to occur, they're able to step in, start investigating where it may be impacting, making sure we're protecting human health and environment. So that means making sure that homes and drinking water are safe, making sure there isn't vapor intrusion, and those type of actions. So we have a number of programs that work together in a situation like this. to address it from prevention all the way to cleanup. And we want to stay on that prevention avenue. That is the important part.
So you've been collecting samples of this for a while now. What are the results that you've seen from the samples you've collected from closer to the leak and also in the general area?
So our press release goes out in some more numbers. What we're trying to really do is find out where the edges are, and if, as was mentioned, this is a karst area as it's spread in ways that it might not in other areas. We know from earlier sampling that the water main is impacted. The petroleum contamination underground is getting into the water main. And so we're really determining also in that case, how extensive is it? Is it at this one place where we just have to replace a small piece of the pipe, or is it a bigger project that needs to be done? So it's really kind of twofold. What is the impact to the drinking water systems? How much needs to be replaced to make sure that we're protecting the drinking water for the whole community? And then also, what other impacts away from the service station and the origin of the leak may be impacted, whether it's the creek, a river, or the lake.
I don't know if you're able to comment on this, but I assume there's some kind of licensing that allows someone to run a service station. Is that in jeopardy for this guy who owns it?
So there are a number of regulations on service station owners. What the MPCA regulates is the underground storage tanks.
Mm-hmm.
So there are requirements that they need to comply with, and that includes making sure the systems do not leak, making sure they're doing visual and the equipment checks to make sure those things are in place. So that's why we're taking the court action. Those things were not done, and so that kicks off the enforcement, and we're asking the court to work with us to determine what are the penalties for this situation.
Which, I mean, that's an excellent question. Could it include losing your license and having to close? I mean, that is something the court could mandate as a result of this?
We will work with the court, and that'll be up to them.
Where is the closest gas station? Do you?
Plainview.
Okay, how far?
5 miles.
5 miles.
Yeah.
So apologies if this question has already been answered, but if somebody in this area suspects that they may have been drinking contaminated water or they are feeling some form of illness that they can't identify, how do they go about reporting that, one? And two, what are some things that they should look out for to be able to tell if they've been consumed contaminated water?
Great question. So they can contact the MPCA. We have generic or general numbers on our website, or the city. We have worked very closely with the city. For instance, the first reports were the smelling of vapors and petroleum products in the stormwater system. The city looked into that and right away contacted us. That's a great way to move forward on this. And if folks are seeing that, we want to know. With the spring here and groundwater changes and that's why we're doing the sampling now, is because we want to make sure that we understand where it's totally going. We don't have that full conceptual model yet of what is under the ground. And so if anyone has concerns, whether it's something in the sanitary sewer or the stormwater system or their drinking water, let us know. Now, for the drinking water in that, we not only sampled those that we know there's impacts, we sampled those around those residents too, to make sure, because we know where the impact is. So we'll continue sampling periodically with the Department of Health's help to make sure that nothing changes.
But would that be grounds for those residents who, so let's say a resident reports that those vapors in their tap water when they run the faucet, would that be enough for them to say 10 years, 15 years down the line, God forbid they suffer some adverse health effect, would that be enough for them to potentially pursue legal action against perhaps the owner of Cenex or Cenex, the company?
That's a good question. That's not something the agencies are a part of. That is a third-party litigation situation. We're just not familiar with that, and unfortunately can't answer that question.
What about just smelling? I mean, like, should residents be concerned if they're walking around their house and they smell gas?
In any situation.
Right, yeah, I mean, but like, what if they
Yeah.
don't own a gas stove and all of a sudden they're smelling gas in their
Yeah,
house?
contact us.
Any last?
Is it this gas station right across the street?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, holy smokes.
Yeah. As far as what I know, the owner also owns and operates a station in St. Charles, is that under any sort of close scrutiny or investigation?
It's correct that the owner owns other stations. We've been in communication with them on those stations, and any other compliance enforcement piece I just can't talk about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Uh-huh.